The air was thick with the weight of the city's secrets, each shadow a reminder of the world's darker corners. I, Thomas Dunn, had once believed in the sanctity of vows, the quiet stability of a life shared. But as the months wore on, the cracks in my marriage to Claire began to show, hidden under the surface, like jagged rocks beneath calm waters. The lies, the missed calls, the late nights that never seemed to end, they all pointed to one inevitable conclusion. She had betrayed me, but revenge? It wasn't something I thought I would ever desire, let alone plan. Yet here I was, a man broken by deceit, unraveling a web that Claire had carefully spun around me, all while leading a double life with David Mercer, a man whose name still burned in my throat like acid. It started with a letter, a simple piece of paper that slipped from the pocket of her coat, forgotten on the kitchen counter. The words on that letter, written in a hand I didn't recognize, shattered the illusion I'd so carefully crafted around my marriage. Claire, my beautiful, charismatic wife, had been living in the shadows of my life, her affections torn between me and David, a man I had once called a friend. I hired a private investigator, a man who knew the streets as well as the inside of a courtroom, and together we began to dig deeper. The truth began to unfold in slow, agonizing revelations. Claire and David had planned not only to destroy our marriage, but to sabotage me financially. They had worked in tandem to ruin my reputation, manipulate my business, and line their pockets with the ruin of my name. But they underestimated me. In my grief, I found a sharp clarity, a cold, calculating edge that allowed me to see through their lies. It wasn't just about hurt anymore. It was about dismantling the empire they'd so carefully built on my misery. I knew I couldn't act in anger. No, I would play the long game. I meticulously gathered evidence, watching Claire as she continued her charade, her innocence a mask that fooled no one who looked closely enough. I began to make my own plans, each move calculated to expose her, to strip her of the power she'd gained through lies. It was a week before everything would come to a head, when the first of many pieces of evidence I had carefully amassed would be delivered to Claire's hands. A simple email, nothing more than a string of numbers and an innocuous message. But it was enough to send her scrambling. I had hired the best lawyer in the city, someone who wasn't just interested in winning a case, but in making sure that justice was served, no matter how long it took. I fed him the evidence, one piece at a time, and as the gears of the legal system began to turn, I set the final part of my plan into motion. David Mercer had always been a coward at heart. He had betrayed me, yes, but he was never as strong as he pretended to be. When the truth came out about his affair with Claire, the business dealings they'd plotted together, and the financial ruin they'd caused, he folded faster than I expected. The evidence, airtight and undeniable, sent him spiraling into a pit of regret. But Claire, she was another story. She fought back with all the ferocity of a woman backed into a corner. Her lies were too elaborate, her manipulations too deep. But I had one last card to play, a carefully planned meeting, a trap I knew she would walk right into. The meeting was at our house, the place where she'd first betrayed me. I made sure she believed everything was in her control, that she could still talk her way out of this. The moment I pressed play on the recording, everything shifted. The evidence was damning. Every secret she had hidden, every plan she'd orchestrated with David Mercer laid bare for the world to see. The look on her face as she realized she had no escape was a moment I would never forget. Claire's carefully crafted image of innocence dissolved in an instant, leaving her exposed, vulnerable. David Mercer, too, had no escape. His betrayal of Claire was a bitter pill, and the final twist, his role in the scheme to ruin me, brought him crashing down with her. The legal battle that followed was swift and brutal. Claire, desperate to manipulate the system, fought tooth and nail, but I had made sure she was trapped. Fraud, conspiracy, financial ruin. She had orchestrated it all. She didn't just lose her place in my life, she lost everything. The courts saw through her lies, and within months, she was facing the consequences of her actions. I watched as Claire's empire crumbled. The prison sentence she received was a fraction of what she deserved, but it was enough. She had tried to destroy me, and in the end it was she who fell. As for me, I walked away from the wreckage, no longer the broken man who had once loved her, but something stronger, a man who had rebuilt his life from the ashes of betrayal. And as I moved forward, I knew that revenge, while satisfying, had only been the first step. Months passed, but the echoes of Claire's betrayal lingered in the air like the faintest trace of perfume, a reminder of a past that no longer had any hold over me. I'd rebuilt my life, brick by brick, with an unshakable resolve. The sting of what she'd done to me was still there, a scar that would never fully heal, but I had learned something vital in the process. Vengeance, no matter how sweet, could never be the end. It had been a means to an end, but not the answer to my suffering. I turned my attention to my business, something I'd neglected in the midst of the turmoil, but now it was all mine. I had once been a part of something I thought was shared. With Claire, something I thought was built on mutual respect and trust. Now I owned it all, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. The victory over her betrayal extended beyond the courtroom. It permeated every part of my life, from my work to my personal relationships. There was something liberating about reclaiming everything she had tried to destroy. Yet as the weeks wore on, I couldn't shake the thought that something else was missing, a deeper satisfaction. The ache, the lingering resentment. It hadn't entirely gone. It had been replaced by a quiet, gnawing curiosity. What had driven Claire to do this to me, to betray everything she had ever claimed to love? It was then I realized the final piece. Of my revenge was not just legal or financial, it was psychological. Claire had destroyed me because in some twisted way, she believed I was weak. She had underestimated my resolve, my ability to endure, and my capacity to fight back. She believed I was predictable. But she was wrong. I would make her see that. I reached out to a few trusted people from our past, including mutual friends, colleagues, those who had once thought I was the problem in our marriage. They were shocked to hear from me, but I carefully explained everything. The affair with David Mercer, the plans to ruin me, the depths to which she had gone to manipulate those around her. I didn't need to seek their validation, but I wanted Claire to hear the truth from those she had once trusted. I knew she would. It wasn't long before whispers started to spread. People began talking. The truth about Claire's deceit started to seep into the circles where she had once been untouchable. Her carefully constructed persona began to crumble once again. This time it wasn't in court. It was in the minds of the people she had spent so long deceiving. They began to question everything about her. Claire was no longer the victim, no longer the misunderstood soul she had played for so long. It was the final phase of my plan, a slow, methodical disintegration of her control over her narrative. Every relationship she had built on lies, every ally she had manipulated, began to erode beneath the weight of her truth. I wanted her to feel every ounce of the isolation I had felt, to experience the same cold realization that no matter how much you hide, no matter how much you manipulate, the truth always comes out. But the final act of this saga wasn't about destroying her reputation further or tarnishing her name. It was something more intimate, something that would haunt her for the rest of her life. I took one final step. I reached out to David Mercer, the man who had so easily discarded me as a friend for his own gain. I asked him a simple question. Why? David's response was a blur of guilt and regret. He had known from the start that he was playing with fire, that his actions were selfish. But his real mistake, he said, had been underestimating me. He never thought I would fight back, not with the depth and precision I had shown. He never thought I would bring everything crashing down, piece by piece, and then, in a moment of raw honesty, he admitted that he too had been manipulated by Claire. She had used him, just as she had used me. Her betrayal wasn't just with one person, it was with everyone who had ever trusted her. David's confession was my final reward. Claire had orchestrated her own demise, not just with me, but with everyone who had ever crossed her path. In the end, I was no longer the one left broken, the one left questioning. She had become the architect of her own ruin, and no one could save her from it. I moved on, but not in the way I expected. Revenge had been sweet, but peace, real, lasting peace, was something entirely different. It wasn't in watching her suffer. It was in knowing that she would never have the power to hurt me again. I had won, not just in the courts, but in life itself. I had freed myself from her grip, and with that freedom came something more precious than any revenge, the chance to rebuild, to trust again, to be whole. Claire, on the other hand, was left with nothing. The life she had once manipulated, the empire she had sought to control, crumbled around her. She had no one left to blame, no one left to deceive. The months that followed were a quiet evolution, almost imperceptible yet profound. The intensity of what I'd endured and the finality of my victory over Claire's betrayal had for the most part been sealed in the courtroom and in the whispers of those who had once stood by her. Yet there was still something more to be explored within me, an unspoken curiosity that urged me to understand not just what had happened, but why it had happened. I had rebuilt my life, sure, but in the rebuilding, I realized I hadn't yet found the full closure I needed. Claire's betrayal, and the way I had methodically dismantled her life, had left me feeling like a soldier who had won the war, but still hadn't quite come to terms with the emotional toll. Her final fall had been swift and decisive, but my own healing process was proving to be a different kind of war. One fought not against her, but against the ghosts of my own emotional wreckage. There was something cathartic in the solitude that followed. I took time for myself, rebuilding the fragments of my life, piece by piece. The dark weight of what had transpired still clung to me, but I no longer let it define me. I found solace in simple things. Long walks by the river, quiet evenings, spent reading or painting, things I had never had the time to appreciate while caught in the chaos of our marriage. It was as if I had been released from the shackles of not just her betrayal, but from the expectations I had placed on myself. Still, I couldn't help but reflect on Claire's final days, before everything had crumbled for her. When I saw her last, her face was a mask of defiance, a stubborn refusal to accept her fate. She was holding on to the remnants of her pride, as if she could still control the narrative, as if she could still weave a story where she wasn't the villain. But deep down, I knew. She was facing the consequence of years of lies, and no matter how she tried to deny it, she would never escape the truth of her actions. I had come to understand that revenge, in its purest form, was not just about punishing someone for what they did. It was about understanding the depths of the betrayal and the consequences of those actions. Claire's downfall had been inevitable the moment she chose to deceive me. But it wasn't my hand alone that brought her down. It was the weight of her choices, her manipulations, the cracks in her own psyche that I had unknowingly exposed. That was the true power in the aftermath, not in the immediate satisfaction of watching her fail, but in the long, slow realization that her betrayal had left her with nothing but her own reflection in the dark. I began to question, too, the nature of trust, what it truly meant to give it, to receive it, and to lose it. How could I trust again, after Claire's betrayal had shattered everything I believed in? It wasn't just about her infidelity, the lies she had woven, or the way she had orchestrated my downfall. It was the realization that trust could be so easily manipulated, broken, and discarded. It had left a scar in me that would never fully heal, but it also gave me a new perspective on the world. Time passed, and I grew stronger in my resolve to move on. But the final lesson I took from this dark chapter of my life wasn't about punishing Claire. It was about reclaiming my power, my autonomy, my ability to choose what I would allow into my life. I refused to become a prisoner to the past, a hostage to the darkness that had once threatened to consume me. I let go of the anger that had fueled me, replacing it with something else, an acceptance of what had happened, and the peace that came from knowing I had done everything I could to expose the truth. Then one day, I received a letter from Claire. It arrived with the same coldness as the day she first betrayed me. A simple, impersonal note that read, "You may have won, Thomas, but you've lost something much bigger. You'll never understand the truth of what happened between us. You think you're stronger now, but the emptiness inside you will always remain." The words were meant to sting, to reignite the bitterness between us. But all I felt when I read them was a quiet laugh, one born not of malice, but of understanding. She still didn't get it. She still didn't understand that the true victory wasn't in her manipulation, her schemes, or even the betrayal she had so artfully planned. The victory had been in my ability to rise above it, to shed the skin of the broken man she had hoped to leave behind. Her words no longer held any power over me. They were the final echo of a woman whose lies had destroyed her own soul. I crumpled the letter, tossing it into the fire, watching as the ink blurred and disintegrated. There would be no more room for her in my life, no more haunting reminders of her empty threats and misplaced arrogance. And so, with Claire's final attempt at manipulation reduced to ash, I took a deep breath and stepped forward once more. As time stretched onward, I found myself in a place I hadn't imagined I would reach, a place of quiet contentment. There were no grand gestures of redemption, no dramatic confrontations. Instead, it was the subtle, daily victories that shaped my new reality. The way I no longer flinched at the sound of a ringing phone, no longer dreaded stepping into spaces where memories of Claire and I used to linger like ghosts. I had become a man at peace with his past, but still very much alive in the present. The betrayal, the revenge, and the emotional toll were chapters I had closed, but I couldn't ignore the lessons they had imparted. I had learned to value my own strength, my own voice. I had learned that no matter how deeply someone tried to wound you, you could always rise, stronger, wiser, unbroken. It wasn't long before I felt the first stirrings of something new. Hope. Not the kind that had once been naive, built on trust and fragile promises, but a more seasoned, grounded hope. The hope that I could rebuild relationships, create something true again. In those quiet moments, I wondered if love, real love, could exist again in my life. And then one evening I met her. Her name was Mia. She was nothing like Claire, no sharp edges, no manipulations veiled in sweetness. Mia was calm, open, kind. We met by chance at an art gallery I had wandered into to clear my head one evening. She was an artist, a woman who spoke through colors and shapes in ways that felt like poetry. Each piece she painted telling a story of hope and loss, of healing and transformation. It was in her eyes that I first saw the quiet understanding, like she had lived through her own battles but had learned not to carry them with bitterness, but as lessons that shaped her in ways that made her better. As we spoke, I could feel a connection, not based on needing someone to fix the holes left by the past, but an openness to simply share what we had experienced in life, without the weight of expectations. The best part? There was no rush. No pressure. We didn't try to make something out of nothing. We just were. And in that simplicity, something profound began to grow. It wasn't the kind of love I'd once had with Claire, one built on illusions and secrets. This was real, grounded, a slow unfolding of trust. I began to open up to Mia about my past, but not in the same way I had once confessed my hurt to others. This time I spoke of it with a calm clarity, not to seek sympathy or closure, but as a part of the story I had lived, the story that had led me to the man I had become. She listened, not with judgment, but with understanding. She accepted the scars, and in a way, it made me believe that maybe, just maybe, there was room for love again. But as much as Mia's presence in my life felt like a new chapter, it also carried the realization that while I had been victorious over Claire, and while I had healed from the wounds she inflicted, there were still lessons to be learned. I had to be cautious, not because I feared betrayal again, but because the greatest betrayal one can inflict upon themselves is to stop trusting, to stop believing in the possibility of something beautiful simply because the past had been ugly. The most powerful part of my healing, I realized, was not in revenge, but in the ability to choose a new path. I had not been a passive participant in my own story, nor would I ever be again. The choice to move forward, to trust again, to open my heart to the possibility of real love, it was a decision I made every day. It was a slow process, filled with moments of doubt, but it was a process I was willing to endure. As the months passed, Mia and I grew closer. She invited me into her world, her art, and together we began to build something simple yet profound. It wasn't a relationship. Without conflict, no, we were both strong-willed individuals with histories that shaped us in ways we couldn't deny. But there was one fundamental difference between Mia and Claire. Mia wasn't looking to control me. She wasn't interested in manipulating me to her will. She simply wanted to walk beside me, to share in the joys and struggles of life. One evening, as we sat on her porch, the sun setting behind us in a wash of orange and pink, she turned to me, her eyes steady and calm. "Do you ever think about Claire?" she asked softly, her voice laced with curiosity, not judgment. I paused, considering the question, the weight of everything that had come before. I had thought about Claire many times, of course. How could I not? But it was different now. The anger, the bitterness had faded, replaced by something far more powerful. Acceptance. "I do," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "But not in the way I used to. I've made my peace with what happened. And I've learned that holding on to the past only keeps us trapped in it. I don't want to live in the shadow of what she did anymore. I want to live in the light of what's ahead." As the months turned into a year, my life with Mia blossomed in ways I hadn't expected. We found joy in the mundane, cooking dinner together, planning spontaneous weekend getaways, even tackling home improvement projects side by side. It wasn't a perfect life, but it was ours. It was a quiet and steady peace that came from a place of mutual respect, trust, and understanding. In Mia, I had found not just a partner, but a confidant, a person who didn't need me to be anything other than who I was. And yet, despite this newfound happiness, there were still moments when my past would rise up to remind me of what I'd been through. It was usually in the stillness of the night when the world around me was quiet and my mind could wander. In those moments, I found myself thinking of Claire, not with anger or resentment, but with something closer to melancholy. What had gone wrong in that marriage? What had made her choose the path she did? And more importantly, what had I learned from it all? It wasn't just about the betrayal anymore. It wasn't about Claire's lies or David Mercer's complicity. It was about understanding that even in the deepest hurt, there was room for growth. There was room for change. I had spent so many years asking why Claire had done what she had. But the real question, the question that had the power to heal, was, what had I learned from her betrayal? I had learned that strength wasn't something you were born with. It was something you earned through hardship, through pain, and through the ability to get back up when the world knocked you down. I had learned that revenge, while cathartic in the moment, could never fill the void of what had been taken. Only acceptance, understanding, and letting go could do that. But perhaps the most important lesson of all was the one I had learned from Mia. Love wasn't a prize to be won or a game to be played. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone or finding someone who could fix your broken pieces. It was about sharing your life, your heart, and your vulnerabilities with another person, trusting that they would do the same. Mia knew about my past, of course. I had shared my story with her early on, as I had learned to do with anyone I let into my life. She had listened patiently, never once judging me for the things I had done or the mistakes I had made. She simply understood that I was human, and in that understanding we had built something stronger than anything I could have imagined. There were no grand gestures, no fireworks or dramatic confessions. Instead, it was the steady comfort of being there for each other when life became difficult, of standing side by side as we both grew and learned. It was a partnership grounded in reality, not in the fantasy of who we thought we should be, but in the authenticity of who we were. One evening, as we sat together on the porch, watching the sunset, Mia turned to me with a soft smile. "You know," she said, "I think we've both come a long way from where we were." I nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "I think we have. And it's taken everything I've gone through to get here. To be able to sit with you, in this moment, and know that everything I've been through has led me to this." She reached out, taking my hand in hers, her touch gentle and reassuring. "And I'm glad you're here with me," she said quietly. "We've both learned that sometimes life doesn't go the way we expect, but that doesn't mean we can't still find happiness even after everything." I squeezed her hand, grateful for her presence, her understanding, and the simplicity of what we had. It wasn't perfect. No relationship ever truly was, but it was real. And that, to me, was everything. As the seasons passed and life moved on, I found myself in a place I had once thought was impossible, at peace with my past and hopeful for the future. I had been betrayed, deceived, and broken by someone I had once loved, but I had also been reborn. And in that rebirth, I had found something even more valuable than revenge, the ability to love again, to trust again, and to build a life rooted in truth and acceptance. Claire's name would always be a shadow in the background of my past, but it no longer controlled my present or my future. I was no longer the man she had tried to destroy, the man consumed by anger and resentment. I was someone new, someone capable of creating the life I had always deserved, a life where love, trust, and peace were no longer just dreams, but realities. And as I looked ahead to the future with Mia, I realized that I didn't need to dwell on the past anymore. The story of my life was no longer about what had been taken from me, but about what I had built for myself, from the ground up. It was a story of resilience, of transformation, and of the quiet, powerful strength that comes from letting go of the things that no longer serve you. In the end, it wasn't revenge that had healed me. It was the simple act of choosing to move forward. As the years continued to unfold, I found myself in a rhythm I hadn't imagined was possible after all I'd been through. My life with Mia had deepened into something enduring, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. In the midst of the mundane routines of daily life, mornings spent brewing coffee, evenings spent curled up on the couch with books or movies, I felt a quiet peace that I hadn't even known I was searching for. Mia and I traveled more now. Not just for the escape, but because we both understood how important it was to experience life outside of the boundaries we had once known. We discovered new places, new cultures, and new sides of each other in every adventure. With each journey, the weight of the past grew lighter, and the horizon before us seemed endless. There were still moments of reflection, of course, when the moon hung low in the sky, or when the quiet of the night made everything feel still and fragile. Memories of Claire would surface, not in anger or resentment, but in a quiet contemplation. I had learned to see my past as part of my story, not something to be erased or buried. It had shaped me, yes, but it no longer defined me. Had also come to understand the importance of forgiveness, not just for the sake of those who had wronged me, but for my own peace. I had forgiven Claire in my own way. Not because she deserved it, she didn't, but because I knew that carrying the weight of that anger, of that betrayal, would only continue to rob me of my own joy. I didn't need to forgive her for her sake, but for mine. Letting go of that final bitterness allowed me to fully step into the life I was now creating, unburdened by the ghosts of the past. As time went on, Mia and I began to talk more seriously about the future. What did it look like? What did we want from it, together? It was in those conversations, in the quiet moments when we shared our hopes and dreams, that I realized how far I had come. Before, I had been paralyzed by the fear of betrayal, of repeating the mistakes of the past. But now, I understood something fundamental. The past could inform my decisions, but it couldn't dictate my future. I was no longer a man defined by the actions of others. I was the architect of my own destiny. One evening, as we sat under the stars, Mia turned to me, her eyes reflecting the same steady understanding they always did. "I know we've been talking about our future," she said softly, "but I want you to know I'm here for whatever it holds. I'm here with you." I smiled, feeling a warmth that ran deeper than just affection. It was an acceptance of everything that had led me to this moment, the pain, the growth, the lessons learned, the healing. And I understood, for the first time, that love wasn't just about finding the right person. It was about finding the right place within yourself to be open to it again. Mia had taught me that. As the years turned into a decade, Mia and I continued to build a life together. There were still challenges, as life tends to throw them at you, but they no longer seemed insurmountable. With her by my side, I felt ready for anything. I had learned to face life not with the weight of the past dragging me down, but with the strength of everything I had overcome. And then, one day, Mia surprised me. She had been hinting at something, for a while. Something about wanting to mark this new chapter of our life together. I hadn't fully understood what she meant until she led me into the living room one evening, where a small, unexpected party was waiting. Family, friends, and even a few old acquaintances, people I hadn't seen in years, gathered to celebrate. As I took in the room, Mia handed me a small box, wrapped in simple brown paper. My heart skipped a beat, 1,000 possibilities running through my mind. What could this be? With a smile, Mia encouraged me to open it. Inside, I found a photo album, filled with pictures from our travels, our milestones, our simple everyday moments. As I flipped through it, I saw not just the images of us, but a reflection of a journey, one that had begun in the dark, painful corners of my past and had blossomed into something full of light and hope. "Do you remember when we first met?" Mia asked, her voice soft. "How different we were then, and now look at us. Look at everything we've built." I smiled, overwhelmed by the realization of just how much we had truly built. We had built a love that wasn't contingent on anything except mutual respect, trust, and the willingness to grow together. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough. As the night wore on and the laughter of friends and family filled the air, I found myself thinking back to those early dark days, the betrayal, the hurt, the anger, the revenge. All of it had been a necessary part of the story. But now, I was finally living a different chapter, one of peace, one of healing, one of love. The past would always be there, a part of me. As the years continued to unfurl, my life with Mia entered a serene and steady phase, one that seemed almost too perfect to be real. But then, the unpredictability of life reminded me that even the most well-crafted stories were not without their challenges. What I had learned over the years, however, was that challenges were no longer a source of dread. They were simply another chapter to be written. One spring morning, as I walked into the kitchen, the scent of fresh coffee mixing with the gentle hum of the world waking up, I found Mia sitting at the table, a somber expression on her face. The light streaming through the window cast a warm glow on her face, but the shadows in her eyes told me something was wrong. I sat down beside her, my heart already beginning to race. "Mia?" I asked, my voice calm, though my mind was racing. "What's going on?" She met my gaze, her eyes filled with a vulnerability I had never seen before. "I've been thinking a lot," she said softly, her hands nervously twisting around the cup in front of her. "And I think I need to tell you something." My mind immediately flashed to the worst possible scenario, the very thing I had once feared most. That perhaps, after everything we'd built, after everything we'd been through, Mia was about to reveal a betrayal of her own. But before I could speak, she continued. "I've been offered an incredible opportunity," she said, her voice growing more assured. "A chance to pursue my art full-time, to open my own gallery, to really dive into the thing I love. It's everything I've dreamed of. But there's a catch. It would require me to move. To be away for a while, maybe, even permanently." The weight of her words hit me hard, but in a different way than I had anticipated. I wasn't facing a betrayal or a lie. I was facing the kind of choice that everyone eventually confronts. What do we do when the path we've been on together suddenly diverges? How do we handle the inevitable shifts in life when everything feels so stable, so perfect? I looked at her, taking in her expression, the excitement in her eyes battling with the uncertainty. I knew what she was asking me without, needing to hear the words. Would I be okay with it? Could I be okay with it? And in that moment, I realized something profound. This wasn't a test of love in the way I had once known it. This wasn't about ownership or control. It was about trust. Trust that we both could pursue our dreams and be fulfilled, no matter where the journey took us. It was about having the strength to face uncertainty together, even if it meant being apart for a time. "I think you should do it," I said, my voice steady and sure. "I want you to follow your dreams, Mia. I always have. I don't want to hold you back, and I know this is important to you." She looked at me, wide-eyed, as if surprised by my response. For a moment, she didn't speak, just sat there, processing my words. "Are you sure?" she finally asked, her voice small. "I thought you'd want us to stay here, to keep everything the way it is." "I'm sure," I said, my heart swelling with a kind of pride I hadn't expected. "I love you, Mia. I want the best for you. And if this is what will make you happiest, then I will support you, no matter what." We sat in silence for a few moments, letting the weight of the decision settle. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. We had built a life together, one that was comfortable and secure. But I also knew that growth, real growth, never came from staying in the same place. It came from being brave enough to take risks, to venture into unknown territories, both physically and emotionally. Over the following weeks, Mia began to prepare for the change. She found a place in the city where her gallery would be, a space that was small but full of potential. It was a dream come true for her, and I could see the fire rekindled in her eyes. But as much as I wanted to support her, a part of me couldn't help but feel a pang of uncertainty. What did this mean for us? For our future? Yet, the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. We had already proven that we could overcome adversity. We had already weathered betrayal and pain. And now, we were about to face a new challenge: distance. The foundation of our relationship was strong enough to survive this shift, I realized. It was built on respect, on trust, and most importantly, on the understanding that love was not about clinging to someone, but about giving them the freedom to grow and become who they were meant to be. The day Mia left was bittersweet. We stood together outside her new gallery, both of us trying to hold back the tears that threatened to fall. She had a new life to start, and I had my own to continue. "Are you sure you'll be okay?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I will be," I said, pulling her into a tight hug. "And I'll be here whenever you need me. This doesn't change what we have. It's just a new chapter." As time flowed steadily onward, I began to notice the subtle shifts in our relationship that came with Mia's success. We were no longer simply two people navigating life together. We were two individuals who had both found fulfillment in our own pursuits. I had never imagined the strength that came with supporting each other's dreams while maintaining a deep emotional connection. But that strength became clearer with each passing day. Mia's gallery flourished. The art world, unpredictable and sometimes unforgiving, had embraced her unique vision, and soon her name became a familiar one in creative circles. It wasn't just her talent. It was her authenticity, her passion that resonated in every piece of art she showcased, every exhibition she curated. The acclaim she received filled me with pride, but I never felt overshadowed by it. If anything, I felt more deeply connected to her because of the courage it took for her to pursue such a bold dream. Watching her become the person she was always meant to be felt like witnessing the unfolding of a masterpiece, something beautiful, inevitable, and yet still surprising in its completeness. Meanwhile, I continued to build the life I had carefully shaped after everything had fallen apart. I had rediscovered the joy of my work, and in my quiet, consistent progress, I felt a sense of pride that wasn't tied to anyone's approval but my own. I had learned that fulfillment wasn't just about career success or grand achievements. It was about finding peace in the small, everyday moments. I was content, grounded. Life had a rhythm to it that felt steady, even when unpredictable moments arose. But no matter how much time passed, there was one thing I had yet to fully process: the remnants of my past. They lingered like ghosts, not in a way that haunted me, but in moments of reflection. Sometimes, when Mia and I were discussing our future, when we spoke about the possibility of children or the next chapter of our lives, I would catch myself holding my breath for just a moment. What did it truly mean to move on? Was I truly free from the shadows of my previous marriage, from the scars of betrayal? And how could I be sure that, in the space I had carved for Mia and I, there was no lingering shadow of the past? It was during one of those quiet, introspective nights that I finally understood what had been missing. In the silence of the evening, with the hum of city life just outside our window, I sat with the thought: true freedom, real healing, comes not from forgetting the past, but from accepting it fully. It wasn't about erasing the chapters of pain or betrayal, or pretending they didn't exist. It was about acknowledging them, respecting how they had shaped me, and understanding that they no longer defined who I was. They were simply part of the story, not the whole of it. I had chosen to learn from them, to allow them to teach me the importance of trust, vulnerability, and resilience. In that moment of quiet revelation, I felt a deep sense of peace. Mia's success, our shared love, my own growth, these were the new chapters of my life. The past would always be there, like a shadow in the background, but it no longer had power over me. And with Mia by my side, I knew we could continue to write the next chapters of our lives together. Months passed, and as we navigated this new phase of our relationship, the space between us felt less like a distance and more like an opportunity for individual growth. Mia traveled for exhibitions, and I focused on my projects. Our conversations were filled with excitement and mutual respect, and the time we spent together was more precious because it was shared intentionally. There was no more taking each other for granted, no more quiet assumptions about the way things would always be. And then one night, as we were sitting on the porch, watching the stars overhead, Mia turned to me with a softness in her eyes that made my heart ache. "I've been thinking a lot," she said, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "About everything, about how far we've come, and I just want you to know how much I appreciate you, your support, your patience, your love. I've never taken it for granted, not once." I smiled, my heart full. "I feel the same way, Mia. You've given me a new perspective on life. You've taught me that love isn't about holding on. It's about letting go, trusting, and growing together." She took my hand, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something profound settle in my chest. A peace I hadn't even realized I was craving. "I've been thinking about the future, too," she said, looking up at the stars. "About what's next for us. Not just in terms of my career, but in terms of our life together. I want to build a family, a life that's not just about what we accomplish, but about how we experience everything together. I want to share that with you." The words struck me with an intensity I wasn't prepared for. I hadn't thought about it in those terms. As we moved forward, our lives began to settle into a rhythm that felt both comfortable and exciting. Mia's career continued to thrive, and my own projects flourished in ways I hadn't anticipated. We made time for one another, balancing our personal ambitions with the shared moments that kept us connected. Whether it was a quiet dinner at home, a weekend getaway to an art gallery she was opening in another city, or simply enjoying the stillness of a Sunday morning spent curled up on the couch. Despite the peaceful cadence of our days, we had also begun to discuss the possibility of expanding our family. Mia had always wanted children, and after everything we'd overcome, I could see the deep desire in her eyes when she spoke of it. The more we talked about it, the more I realized that I, too, felt ready. We had both grown so much in our individual pursuits that I believed we had finally found the foundation to raise a family, not just a stable one, but one rooted in love, respect, and the wisdom we had gained through our own personal journeys. But as much as we embraced this new stage of life, the past was never entirely gone. It never could be. Claire, and everything she had put me through, remained a chapter I could never truly erase. And yet, as I looked back on it, I realized that it had become something far less potent than it once was. It was no longer a weight I carried on my shoulders, but a distant memory, a story of who I had been, not who I was. One evening, after a particularly moving phone call with Mia, who was preparing for her next big exhibit overseas, I found myself reflecting on everything I had gone through, from the pain of Claire's betrayal to the redemption I had found through Mia and the life we had built. It was almost as if the universe had conspired to bring me here, to this moment of peace and understanding. Suddenly, I was struck by an idea, a thought so powerful it consumed me entirely. What if the very act of forgiveness, not just towards Claire, but toward myself, could finally allow me to lay the past to rest completely? What if I could reclaim that final piece of my heart that I had been holding on to for so long? The next day, I made a decision. I would reach out to Claire, not with anger or accusation, but with the intent to let go, to say the things I had never said. No more games, no more revenge, just truth, the final chapter that would allow me to close the book on our past, once and for all. The decision wasn't easy. I didn't expect Claire to respond with any semblance of remorse or understanding. But I also knew that this wasn't for her. It was for me, and I was ready. I found her contact information, a number I hadn't called in years. My fingers hovered over the phone for a long time before I finally dialed. It rang twice before her voice answered, the same coldness I remembered in her tone lacing her words. "Hello?" I took a deep breath, my heart racing but my mind clear. "Claire," I began, my voice steady. "It's been a long time, and I've thought about this moment for a while now. I'm not calling to accuse you or bring up the past. I've let go of that anger, but I think it's time for closure, for both of us." She was silent for a moment, and I could almost hear her processing my words, the same guarded tone coming through in her voice. "What do you want exactly?" "I just want to tell you that I forgive you." "I forgive you for everything," I said, the words feeling heavy but also incredibly freeing. "I don't need you to apologize, and I'm not asking for anything in return. I just need you to know that I'm at peace. It took me a long time, but I've let go, and I hope you can do the same." For what felt like an eternity, there was silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Claire spoke, her voice softer than I remembered. "I don't know what to say," she replied, almost as if the confession had caught her off guard. "I never expected you to say that." "I don't need you to say anything," I replied. "I just needed to say it for myself." There was a long pause, then a resigned sigh. "Well, I guess that's all I needed to hear too." And with that, the conversation ended. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cathartic in the way I had imagined it might be. But as I hung up the phone, something inside of me shifted. I had finally truly let go. The chains of anger, regret, and betrayal that had held me hostage for so long were no longer shackling me to the past. And that night, when Mia returned home, her face radiant with excitement from her trip, I found myself looking at her with new eyes. Eyes that saw not just the love we shared, but the strength and resilience that had brought us to this point. We were both different people than we had been when we first met. We had both endured and grown, and now we were ready to face whatever came next, together. As I lay in bed that night, listening to the soft rhythm of Mia's breathing beside me, I felt a quiet satisfaction settle in my chest. The months that followed were filled with a renewed sense of possibility. Mia and I, now fully in tune with one another, settled into a rhythm that felt not just comfortable, but exhilarating. There was an understanding between us, unspoken, but felt deeply, that we were building something that was not just about surviving life's challenges, but about truly living, embracing the unknowns, and taking them on with open hearts. Our conversations about the future began to take on new meaning. We talked about the possibility of children, of how we would raise them together, how our individual dreams would continue to coexist within the framework of our shared vision. Mia's gallery continued to flourish, and I found new ventures that pushed me out of my comfort zone, discovering creative outlets that I hadn't even considered before. We supported each other's aspirations with a level of respect and love that I had never experienced before, and it was as if we were both becoming the best versions of ourselves, not in spite of each other, but because of each other. But even in the midst of this contentment, I couldn't shake the feeling that the story of my past wasn't entirely finished. The past had taught me painful lessons, but it had also sculpted me into someone stronger, wiser, and more capable of navigating the complexities of life. And there was still one final piece of closure I hadn't yet found: the question of whether I would ever truly face the consequences of Claire's actions. I knew, in my heart, that I had let go of the anger, but something inside me told me that Claire's betrayal, though no longer a weight, still hung in the air, unresolved. I had forgiven her, but what about the part of me that had been wronged? The part of me that wanted to see justice, to see her answer for what she had done. Was it enough to simply move on, or did something deeper need to be confronted? I couldn't ignore it any longer. I made the decision to reach out to an old contact. Someone who had been a part of my life back when everything was unraveling. It was time to get answers, not from Claire, but from the people who had been around her during those dark days. I made the call. "David Mercer," I said to my old associate on the other end of the line. "We need to talk." David had always been a shady character, someone who had benefited from the turmoil Claire had caused. He had a way of slipping in and out of people's lives, making deals behind the scenes, but never really taking the fall for anything. At least, not that anyone had known. He was as much a part of Claire's betrayal as she was. And I couldn't shake the feeling that I had never truly confronted him. The meeting was set for the next week. I had no illusions about what I would get out of it, but I needed to understand something more deeply. How far had Claire's web of deceit stretched? And had David Mercer played a bigger role in my downfall than I had initially thought? The day arrived, and I found myself sitting across from David at a dingy cafe in a part of town that felt as though it had been forgotten by time. The smell of stale coffee mixed with the low hum of the nearby street traffic, creating a setting that felt out of place for such an important conversation. David looked the same as he always had, sharp, calculating, and with that glint of indifference in his eyes. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "You're here, so what's on your mind?" he asked, leaning forward, his hands folded neatly on the table. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I'm not here for small talk, David. I want the truth. Everything about your involvement with Claire." His expression faltered for a split second before he recovered. He leaned back in his chair, his lips curling into a thin smile. "You still haven't let it go, have you?" "Let it go?" I repeated, the old anger rising briefly before I squashed it down. "I don't think you understand what let it go means. You and Claire destroyed everything I worked for. You don't just walk away from that. There's a price to pay, David. And I want to know how deep it goes." David chuckled softly, his eyes scanning the room as if the question I had asked was insignificant, nothing more than a mere distraction. "You think you're the only one who's ever been betrayed? Who's ever been wronged in this world?" He paused, letting the words linger. "I've done what I've had to do to survive. You should know that." "Survive?" I asked, my voice low and even. "You think you're the victim here? You were part of this, David. You helped her manipulate and use me. So tell me, what did you get out of it?" He exhaled slowly, as if weighing his options, then leaned forward again, his voice a whisper. "I helped her because she had leverage over me. You don't know the half of it, my friend. Claire wasn't just some pretty face. She was a master at playing the game. She knew how to make things go her way, and when she wanted something, she made sure she got it." The drive home felt different that night. The city lights flickered in the distance, neon reflections swimming across the rain-slicked pavement. I let the hum of the tires against the road fill the silence as I processed everything. David's words lingered in my mind like the last embers of a dying fire. Claire got what she deserved. There had been something in his tone, something final, almost regretful. It was the way he had said it, the way his eyes had flickered with something close to fear. And yet, I didn't feel the need to dig any deeper. Claire's fate had been sealed the moment she underestimated the very people she had manipulated, and that was no longer my concern. I pulled into my driveway and stepped into the warmth of my home, greeted by the scent of something rich and savory simmering in the kitchen. Mia was there, standing by the stove, barefoot, a glass of wine in her hand. She turned to me with a soft smile, her dark eyes filled with a quiet understanding. "You're home late," she said, setting down her glass. "Everything okay?" I walked over, wrapping my arms around her waist and pressing a lingering kiss to her forehead. "Yeah," I murmured. "Everything's exactly where it should be." She leaned into me, and for the first time in years, I felt completely present. No ghosts, no unfinished business, just this, just her. We sat down for dinner, the conversation flowing effortlessly. She told me about her latest exhibit, the stress of managing artists, the ridiculousness of a last-minute venue change. I listened, fully engaged, drinking in every word, and somewhere between the laughter, the stolen glances, and the way her hand rested lightly over mine, I realized something profound. Revenge hadn't set me free. Justice hadn't given me peace. Love. Had not love in the naive, blind way I had once believed in it, but love that had been tested, fractured, and rebuilt into something unbreakable. Love that had survived betrayal, loss, and the darkest parts of human nature. I had spent years looking backward, caught in the cycle of resentment and anger, thinking that my happiness depended on settling the score. But real victory had never been about Claire or David Mercer. It had never been about the past at all. It was this quiet moment, this undeniable certainty that I had won in the only way that truly mattered. Mia looked at me, studying me in that way only she could. "You seem different tonight," I smiled, squeezing her hand. "I think I finally let go," I admitted. "And it feels good." She held my gaze for a moment before nodding. "Good," she whispered. "You deserve that." And as we sat, there, the past nothing more than distant echoes, I knew I was free. For the first time in a long, long time, I was truly, completely free. The end. Although the story had reached its natural conclusion, life itself never truly stops. It evolves, shifts, and continues on its unpredictable course. Months passed, and with each day, the weight of my past grew lighter. Claire had become a ghost of a life I no longer lived. The scars remained, but they no longer dictated my future. My focus was on Mia, on the love we had cultivated, on the quiet certainty that this was the life I was always meant to have. Then one evening, just as the world seemed to have finally settled into peace, the phone rang. I almost didn't answer it. The number was unknown, the kind that most people would let ring out into oblivion. But something inside me, some quiet instinct, told me to pick up. "Hello?" A moment of silence. Then a voice I hadn't expected to hear again. "It's Claire." For a second time froze. The last time we had spoken, I had let go of everything. I had given her my forgiveness, not for her sake, but for mine. And yet here she was, her voice threaded with something I had never quite heard before, desperation. "What do you want?" I asked, my tone steady. "I need your help." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Claire, the woman who had tried to ruin me, who had manipulated and betrayed me in ways I never could have imagined, was now reaching out for help? "Help?" I echoed, incredulous. "You must be joking." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then she exhaled, and for the first time, there was something raw, something almost human in her voice. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "David Mercer. He's not done with me." The name alone sent a ripple of unease through me. I had walked away from David believing that he, like Claire, had been nothing more than a player in a larger game, one that had ultimately collapsed, in on itself. But now, hearing the fear in her voice, I realized something. Maybe I had underestimated just how deep the rabbit hole went. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. I could hang up. I could tell Claire that whatever hell she had walked into, she had done so by her own choices. But something told me this wasn't just about her. Something told me that my story, the story I thought had ended, wasn't quite finished yet, and that terrified me. I gripped the phone tighter, my mind racing. Why should I care, Claire? My voice was calm, but the ice beneath it was unmistakable. The last time I saw you, you were trying to burn my life to the ground. Now suddenly, you need my help? A shaky breath from the other end. Then, because if you don't, you're next. That stopped me. I glanced at Mia, who was curled up on the couch, reading, oblivious to the storm that had just re-entered my life. I stepped out onto the balcony, needing space to think. What the hell are you talking about? David, he's dangerous. More dangerous than either of us realized. I almost laughed. You just figured that out? You were in bed with the guy, literally and figuratively. Don't be an idiot, she snapped, and for a brief second she sounded like the old Claire, arrogant, sharp, condescending. But then she lowered her voice. You think you walked away clean? You think David Mercer just let it go? I didn't. Answer, Claire continued. You were a loose end, but then you disappeared, settled down. He had bigger problems. But now things are unraveling, and I heard your name, Liam. He hasn't forgotten you. I ran a hand through my hair. I had spent years untangling myself from this mess. Years making sure that my revenge was precise, controlled. Mercer had lost everything when I exposed his dealings, but I had assumed he had cut his losses and moved on. Maybe that was a mistake. Where are you? I asked finally. There was a long pause. Then, quietly, someplace safe. For now. I could tell she was lying. Claire, I said, my voice low. If you're lying to me again, I swear, I'm not, she interrupted. Liam, I don't have anyone else to turn to. You know what he's capable of, and now he's coming after me. Maybe after you. You might not care what happens to me, but do you really want to take that risk? She was playing me. She always had. And yet, something felt different this time. The fear in her voice wasn't calculated. It wasn't a manipulation. It was real. I took a breath. I could walk away, hang up, let her deal with the fallout of her own sins. Or I could find out what Mercer was up to before he found me first. Where can we meet? I asked. Another pause. Then, tomorrow night, 11. The old train. Yard on Ashland. I almost laughed. A cliché meeting spot, Claire? Really? You think I have options? She shot back. Just be there. The line went dead. I stared at the phone for a long time before finally stepping back inside. Mia looked up, her eyes filled, with quiet curiosity. Who was that? I hesitated. Then, no one important. She studied me for a moment, but thankfully she let it go. I walked to the liquor cabinet, poured myself a drink, and stared out into the night. I had thought the game was over, that the past had finally released me, but I was wrong. It wasn't over. Not yet. The past never stays buried. The old train yard on Ashland was the kind of place where things, people, secrets, lives, disappeared without a trace. Rusted freight cars stood abandoned, covered in graffiti, their metal shells rotting under flickering floodlights. The air smelled of rain and oil, and the silence was thick, broken only by the distant hum of the city beyond. I arrived 10 minutes early. I always did. Years of being burned had taught me one thing: control the environment before it controls you. I parked my car a block away, out of sight, and approached on foot. My instincts were on high alert. Meeting Claire was a risk. I knew that. The woman was a professional liar, a master manipulator. If she was reaching out to me, it meant she had exhausted every other option. That alone should have been a red flag. And yet, here I was. A shadow moved near one of the abandoned train cars. I exhaled slowly and stepped forward. Claire. She emerged. From the darkness, wrapped in a long coat, her blonde hair damp from the drizzle. She looked different. Not the confident, ruthless woman I had once loved. not the venomous viper I had destroyed. She looked tired, haunted, afraid. "You're alone?" she asked, voice tight. "You already know the answer to that." I studied her. "Talk." She swallowed hard and glanced around, as if expecting Mercer to step out of the shadows at any second. "I don't have much time. He knows I ran." "You were working with him for years," I said, folding my arms. "Why run now?" "Because he's killing people, Liam." I let that sit between us. Claire clenched her fists. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. We were supposed to ruin you, take what we needed and disappear. But after you exposed him, Mercer lost everything. His businesses, his influence. He went underground, rebuilt himself in a way I never saw coming. And now he's tying up loose ends." I watched her carefully. "And you think you're one of them?" Her voice wavered. "I know I am." For the first time in years, Claire wasn't in control. She wasn't the one pulling the strings. "Why come to me?" I asked coldly. "Why not go to the cops?" She let out a bitter laugh. "You think Mercer doesn't have people on the inside? He owns them. The second I show my face, I'm dead." I shook my head, stepping closer. "You want my help, Claire? Fine. But you're leaving something out. What is it?" She hesitated, then, in a barely audible whisper, "I have proof. That changed everything." "What kind of proof?" She reached into her coat, pulled out a small USB drive, and pressed it into my palm. Her fingers were ice cold. "Everything Mercer has done since going underground. Names, transactions, kill orders." Her lips parted, her breath uneven. "If he finds out I have this, I'm dead, Liam. And if you have it, so are you." I stared at the drive in my hand, the weight of it heavier than it should have been. "Why are you giving this to me?" Claire swallowed, then met my eyes. "Because you're the only person I know who can bring him down." Thunder rumbled in the distance. The past wasn't just knocking, it had just kicked the damn door open. To be continued. A ghost in the dark. I stared at the USB drive in my hand, its cold plastic casing pressing into my palm like a loaded gun. The weight of Claire's words hung between us. "You're the only person I know who can bring him down." I had spent years thinking I had won, that Mercer was done, that Claire was out of my life for good. But the past wasn't finished with me. And now, I was holding evidence that could burn Mercer's empire to the ground, evidence that could get me killed. I clenched my jaw. "Where did you get this?" Claire swallowed hard. "I stole it from his safe before I ran. It's everything, Liam. Proof of his offshore accounts, payoffs, murders. He's more powerful than we ever thought." "You mean you ever thought?" I corrected. "I knew exactly what kind of man he was." Claire flinched. She wasn't used to being powerless, and it showed. I turned the USB over between my fingers. This was leverage, a weapon, but also a target painted on my back. If Mercer found out I had this, he'd come for me. And worse, he'd come for Mia. I exhaled slowly. "You should have burned this the second you took it." Claire shook her head. "I tried, but I couldn't do it. If I disappear without a trace, Mercer wins, and I can't let that happen." I studied her carefully. "So what do you want from me, Claire? Protection? A getaway plan?" Her lips pressed together. "I want you to help me take him down." I laughed under my breath. "You're out of your mind, Liam." "Please," she pleaded. "You're the only one who's ever outplayed him. You destroyed him once. You can do it again." I took a step back, shaking my head. "No, I'm out. I walked away. I built a life. One without you, without Mercer. Without—" "This bullshit! Then why are you here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't answer, because she was right. Something deep inside me had known, the second I picked up that call, that I wasn't going to walk away. Not really. Mercer had been a ghost haunting the edges of my mind for too long. I had thought I was free, but maybe true freedom only came when the ghosts were gone for good. My jaw tightened. "You need a place to hide?" She nodded hesitantly. I sighed. "Get in the car." She hesitated. "What?" "You need a safe house. I know a place." I pocketed the USB. "But you'd better be telling me everything, Claire, because if I find out you're playing me again—" "I'm not," she whispered. I searched her face for any trace of a lie. For the first time in our long, tangled history, I didn't find one. But that didn't mean I trusted her. I turned on my heel and headed toward the car, Claire falling into step behind me. I had spent years believing my war with Mercer was over. I was wrong. And this time, I wasn't just playing for revenge. I was playing to end this. For good. To be continued.